Talking about former Eagles in the NFL. Again, the NFL training camps opened this past week on Friday or Saturday, depending on which camp you're in. But 7 different Eagles reporting to training camp this past week. Darrell Baker Jr., cornerback for the Arizona Cardinals out in Glendale, Arizona. And he's somebody that has kind of flown under the radar, no pun intended on flown, but he's kind of flown under the radar. He signed as an undrafted free agent, and he's somebody that could earn a spot special teams, and knowing the way that he's been, he's somebody that you could see working into a roster spot.
When Jim Nagy from the Reese's Senior Bowl got onto him middle of last year because of the measurables, I mean, he's got an amazing structure to him. He could play in the back end. He played all 3 positions in the defensive backfield during his time at Georgia Southern. But when Jim Nagy has you on his radar, it gets serious. And I feel bad a little bit because Darrell played through injury last year. He hurt the ankle. He hurt the elbow. Still, though, has the measurables, tests extremely well. And in the NFL, you can find a way through with your athleticism. That'll get you in.
Yeah.
But as Kendall Vildor has found, and this is something that he spent years perfecting here, your technique is what's going to set you over the top.
Yeah.
Everybody can run a little bit. Everybody can jump a little bit. But if you can do things correctly, time in, time out, that's when the good note goes on the clipboard.
And I think something that will kind of set Darrell Baker apart is a lot of the undrafted free agents will have a lot of measurables, like you talk about, the speed, the skills, and whatnot. But Darrell Baker, we've talked about it a lot, how smart of a football player he is. And with the previous defense, that position you had to be, especially when you're playing all across the back line.
I'll reference a conversation we had with Scott Sloan that in 2020, Darrell Baker played corner and then both safety positions in the same game. That was against UMass. That was the game that was just added to the schedule about a week and a half before. Scott said that in 29 years of coaching, he never had a guy play all 3 of those positions in the same game. And that was the game he had the crazy jumping interception that prevented UMass's touchdown.
Unreal.
So I hope the undrafted free agents, you have a special attachment to because
for sure.
And we'll talk about Raymond Johnson in a minute, but with Darrell, I really hope he gets a chance.
Yeah. Somebody that we know will, outside of something absolutely crazy happening, break camp with the Buffalo Bills, Tyler Bass at kicker over in Orchard Park, New York, for the training camp for the Bills, and he's somebody that feel pretty good that he's going to be on that opening day roster.
And I saw earlier today where apparently his holder is, do you remember the San Diego State punter last year, Matt Ariza, the one that was booming 80-yarders every week? Apparently he was holding for him today.
Of course he was. I mean, duh.
So who's good? Who's the swaggiest of those two, or the swaggier of those two?
Yeah, T-Bass. I'm going to put my money on that one. Next up is Matt Breida, making his way to the New York Giants in their training camp over in East Rutherford, New Jersey. It's hard to believe he's been in the league for 6 years now, but signed with the Giants in the offseason, has seen time between a couple of different organizations with Miami the last couple of years, but he will obviously be behind Saquon Barkley, but has a definite shot with the speed that he's got to earn a roster spot with the Giants.
And Barkley's coming back from injury himself, and knowing that he's had health issues for a good portion of his career, it's not out of the question to think that Breida is not going to at least see decent action, maybe even really good action if the Giants go to a full timeshare. But Barkley, if he's healthy, he's one of those few guys that could be your, let's give it to him, 25, 30 touches. There aren't that many guys left, not that many guys that have that in the NFL anymore. But we'll have to see how that works out for Breida.
Next up, you mentioned him a little bit earlier, Raymond Johnson III at defensive end for the Cincinnati Bengals. Just signed with the Bengals a couple of weeks ago, back in July. But we mentioned it earlier. Made the Giants last year as an undrafted free agent. Recorded a sack of a guy named Tom Brady. And we'll try to do the same thing with the Cincinnati Bengals this year.
That's the defending AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals, too. So not just
That still sounds so weird to me.
Because we're used to Cincinnati being in the lower portion of the AFC, but Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, they have just exploded and nearly won the Super Bowl last year. Yeah. In fact, if it's not at SoFi Stadium, home of the Rams, maybe they do win the Super Bowl.
Next up, another kicker from Georgia Southern University and Younghoe Koo, the Atlanta Falcons out in Flowery Branch. Koo is somebody that is already impressing at Falcons training camp. Saw Wes Durham tweet out earlier on, I think it was the first day of training camp. He was 5 for 5 and made a 53-yarder just to warm up on the day.
Yeah.
But he is somebody that some would say he was the Falcons offense last year, and depending on what the quarterback looks like this year, maybe the offense again for the Falcons. But it's good to see Younghoe Koo making his contributions. And I still go back to the day you and I were in Atlanta for the Falcons-Saints game working with Westwood One. And was it 4 onside kicks that were pulled off? Well, 3 of them, only 2 of them counted.
They recovered all 3, but only 2 counted.
Still blows my mind. But Koo doing his thing up in Atlanta.
He's one of those guys where whatever he touches, he can do extremely well.
With a smile on his face, too.
Remember those practices in 2016 where the specialist would just be on the sideline. He'd be making crazy eyes closed, one-handed catches behind his back, just kicking from all angles. He's got it. He's an athlete.
Next up, Jerick McKinnon with the Kansas City Chiefs. There was a little bit of question of whether he was going to be back in Kansas City. Wasn't initially re-signed at the end of the season, but throughout the summers, the Chiefs did bring him back into camp out at St. Joseph's, Missouri. And he's somebody that kind of shifted roles of what still obviously as a running back, but went more as to the pass-catching running back last year for the Chiefs and ended up having a pretty good role with the Chiefs a year ago.
It's funny that that's happened because he wasn't asked to catch a whole lot of passes at Georgia Southern. In fact, I think the best pass catching he did was the playoff where he had to move to DB and he had 2 interceptions in the main game. But to know that he is part of one of the best offenses in the NFL, Patrick Mahomes, you know, is going to be an MVP candidate every year and likely a Super Bowl candidate every year as long as he's healthy.
And finally, the 7th and final Georgia Southern Eagle in the NFL training camps, Kendall Vildor, cornerback with the Chicago Bears out in Lake Forest, Illinois. He's somebody that was in and out of the starting lineup a year ago, but all reports out of Chicago say that he is battling for the starting spot, new staff in Chicago, and so it looks like he is kind of the front runner as you start training camp to be able to lock up that starting position.
And maybe the way he mentored Derek Canteen here, he could play mentor to Kyler Gordon, somebody that Will Harris coached for the last 4 years at Washington before he was the 39th pick in the draft this year.
So the 7 former Eagles in the NFL training camps, we will keep you abreast and a couple of weeks before the first cuts down to 85 on the roster, I believe. So a couple of weeks, and we will let you know how everybody is kind of progressing as you go throughout training camp to the start of the NFL season. Probably about 2-3 weeks after college football gets going.
Yeah, you've got the college football season starting 26 days from now.
I think Frank Solkowski put it best, as normally he does. It's August 1st. There is college and NFL football going to be played this month. I'm happy.
In our case, that August 27th is somebody who's very early on the schedule because Nebraska plays Northwestern over in Ireland. So the week before, Georgia Southern preps for Morgan State here in Statesboro, get a chance to see the second opponent because we'll be heading to Lincoln for the 10th.
So the 7 Eagles in professional football: Daryl Baker, Tyler Bass, Matt Breida, Raymond Johnson, Younghoe Koo, Jerick McKinnon, and Kendall Vildor. We will let you know on their status as we go throughout training camp in the NFL season. But